Okay guys, welcome to another video. So I was out with my boat yesterday, so I was trailing on my boat, and I noticed when I was hitting the brakes I was getting a grinding noise at like the very last, I don't know, 5 feet of braking. So I think I got low brake pads. So what we're going to wind up doing today is checking my front brakes and maybe adjusting the rear brakes. I got rear drums, front discs on this, so we have to now get this vehicle jacked in the air. Alright guys, so we're going to start by jacking the car up, and what I've done is I put a sheet of plywood down so when I jack it up I don't do any damage to my driveway. Blacktop, especially when it's warm in the summertime, you jack up, your wheels make an imprint onto the blacktop. So I'm going to jack up both wheels from this cross beam underneath the engine. That seems to be the safest spot to do, and then I'm going to wind up putting a jack stand under it. Now the same thing with the jack stand, we want to have a piece of wood under it because it will definitely put marks in your driveway and your dad will want to kill you. Another thing you want to do is put something behind the tire so it doesn't roll. I'm using a brick. Okay, so now it's time to take the tire off. I got my cordless impact gun. It's a 19 millimeter socket, or a 3/4. Man, those guys were on tight. Okay, so I got the tire off, and this is our rotor, and this is our caliper, and inside there are our brake pads, and they're about halfway worn on the outer pad. Now let's look at the inside pad. So what I see on the inside pad is the backing plate and then our friction material, and our friction material is way thinner than our backing plate, so definitely need brakes. By the way, on this rotor you might see holes drilled in it. They're called drilled and slotted. Now the reason why I put these types of rotors on this vehicle is because I live in the mountains, and going down the mountain sometimes makes your brakes get really hot and they wind up warping your rotors. Warping the rotor means your brake pedal will start shaking. So if you guys are ever driving and you say you're going 80 miles an hour on the parkway and you're getting off an exit ramp and you hit your brakes and the brake pedal starts shaking, usually means your brake rotors are warped and it's causing your brake pedal to vibrate. What it's actually doing is making the piston go in and out, which is causing the fluid to go back all the way to your brake pedal and make it move. So I wasn't having that problem, but I used to have that problem a lot until I started putting these drilled and slotted rotors on. Yeah, heat could be really bad. It can cause the fluid in here to boil, make it air, and you actually like get brake fade. The brake pedal will travel too much and your brake performance will go way down. Be hard to stop when you overheat your brakes. So I'm going to wind up putting new brake pads on it and probably adjust my rear brakes. Their drums are adjustable. I've been noticing the truck hasn't been stopping too good. Alright, so things I'm going to need for this job is I'm going to need to take my caliper off and check my slide pins, and I'm not going to wind up cutting or replacing the rotors right now because I don't have them with me, but I might wind up replacing the rotors. They look like they're kind of worn out, but I need a wrench to fit these. Looks like a 14 millimeter. Okay, so I'm going to start taking the 2 bolts that hold the caliper on. Got my ratcheting combo wrench. Love these wrenches. One of the best investments I ever made. They're made by Gear Wrench. They're a little pricey. Set's going to cost you over $100, but I've had these probably already 20 years and they do a nice job. So I got my 1 bolt off. Not really a lot to do on brakes. Very easy work. Not a lot to it, but definitely have to do it right or cost somebody their lives. Car won't stop or the bolt falls off. Alright, so I got my caliper off. I just look at my boots, see if there's any signs of leaking, looking at my pistons, see if there's any cracks. I look at my brake hose, make sure there's no cracks or anything on that. I'm going to hold it right here so I'm not putting stress on my hose. Take my 1 brake pad off. You can see that one is about to the point that I would probably tell the customer, yeah, you might want to think about doing brakes. And then we got the inside one, which is like, there's almost nothing left. It's not down to metal, but it is definitely low that if I saw this for a customer, I'd be like, yeah, you need brakes now. All right. So the other thing I want to check is my pins. Yeah, this pin's definitely got some rust and no grease in it. So that has to be lubed up. This one's stiff too. Doesn't even want to come out of its hole. I'm going to have to work on that and grease it up. And I'm going to wind up using some brake part lube. And I'm going to wind up lubing my pins. That's usually a sign of when you have an inside pad that is worn a lot more than the outside pad, is usually these guide pins are stuck. That will definitely cause uneven wear, these pins being stuck. Sometimes they're so stuck you can't even get them out. They snap and they break off and you have to buy a new bracket with new pins. But I think I'm going to be able to get these off. I think I'm going to be able to clean them up and get them to move properly. So this is the cause of why my brakes failed prematurely, is these pins. So I'm going to have to put new pins on it. Not new pins. I'm going to have to take the pins off, clean them, and put lube on them. Okay, so I got the pins out. And what I did is they were a little bit rusty, and I hit them with some sandpaper. Now I'm going to wind up putting some lube on them. So we got this orange brake lube. Put some on there. And I'm going to wind up working it into the hole. Get some in there. A little more on it. I'll make sure I got a nice amount of lube that these are going to work in and out fine. So we have good caliper movement. So they slide in and out nice. Just gotta put a dust boot back on. We don't want to get any water in there because that causes rust. We want to make sure we have good movement back and forth. Because when the piston moves, this caliper actually slides a little bit to make the outside pad work. If only these are stiff, only the piston side works, and the outside, the caliper doesn't slide over and doesn't make the outside pad work. I want you to see that these pins are moving nice and easy now. That's going to cause my brakes to work a lot better. They should be able to push in and out. Alright, so now what we have to do is get these pistons pushed back into their cylinders. And I have this specialty tool that's going to push both pistons at the same time. I've seen guys use C-clamps. They push one in at a time. This one pushes out, and then they wind up having issues. You could use a brake pad with a C-clamp, and it'll probably push them both in at the same time. But I happen to have this nice specialty tool that does a nice job of it. So I just pull on my handle here. I keep squeezing until the pistons go back in their cylinders. Now, sometimes what happens, we're pushing fluid back through this hose to the master cylinder. Sometimes the master cylinder might overflow. There might be too much brake fluid in it. I don't see nothing dripping, but I got them all the way in. Actually, yep, there's some brake fluid coming out. Don't be alarmed by that. That's just coming out of the top of the master cylinder. She's a little over full. And now I have to release it. So I'm going to hit this little switch here. And then pull back on it. And we got our pistons in. Now also where the brake pad goes, I like to wind up putting a little lube in there. Put it on my finger and I put a little dab on those little pieces there. We might wind up changing these anyway, but I just want to do a demo in case your brake pads don't come with these new spacers. Just put a little dab on there. Don't want to get it on the rotor, don't want to get it on the brake pad material. I don't like using the brush for this. It tends to be not accurate and you wind up getting it on the rotor. Alright, so we're going to have a little bit of an unboxing. So I've got these Advanced Auto, the Gold Series. I don't like to go cheap on my brakes. I like to get good brakes, you know. Definitely want to be able to stop my vehicle. And they come with new shims, which I'll wind up putting on. And then we got our brake pads. Nice stuff. Comes with an outer shim that'll keep it from more than likely having less squeaks. It's like good material. We'll compare these to the old ones. So this is a brand new pad. You can see how much material there is, friction material, and how little there is here. So you can see how much they've worn out. So now you know what a bad brake pad looks like and a good brake pad looks like. So if you're ever inspecting someone's brakes, but my rule of thumb is that if the material is less than the backing plate, it needs to be replaced. So if you look at this one, which I was saying was only half worn, you can tell that it's half worn. So someone could probably get, if both pads were like this, they could probably get another, I don't know, 7,000 miles of braking on it. Also depends on the style of driving. If you say you're a pizza delivery guy, you're going to go through brakes a lot of stop and go. If most of your mileage on your car is highway, you probably get a lot out of this, because when you're driving on the highway, you don't do as much braking. So like cop cars, they go through brakes, taxis, Uber drivers, anyone that drives around town, that's all the driving they do. They go through brake pads really fast. Alright, so now we're going to wind up replacing these clips. Just wind up using a screwdriver, pry them out of place. You open your bag, you get a new one out. Now this piece you got to make sure doesn't wind up hitting the rotor. You don't want any of this metal scraping on anything, which I've had happen before. But you kind of just maneuver them in a way that you can snap them into place. Don't want to bend them too much. I always try to get the top in first and the bottom. So this metal piece in here is giving me a little trick. Sometimes I have to push it in with a screwdriver, and it's now in place. I turn my rotor, make sure I don't hear anything scraping against the rotor, and I'm good. And I got to do the next one. Put it in, get that piece in there, take my screwdriver, kind of push it, it's in place, spin my rotor, make sure it's not hitting, we're good. I'm going to put a little dab of grease on there. Problem with sometimes using grease here is they'll collect dirt, cause a little binding, but it's my preference to put a little grease there. So I got my brake pad. You want the friction material facing the rotor. Years ago I was working at a place and a kid doing his first brake job put the metal side against the rotor. So they kind of just slide in that spot. A little bit of a tight fit. All right, let's try that again. All right, so sometimes you have to get this piece to push down on these little pieces to get them to go in properly. So I kind of started at an angle and get the bottom in, and then try to fold them into place. Let's try that again. And sometimes brake pads are stamped out on a machine and they might be a little off. They put the coating on it, makes it a little too large for its spot, which might be the case here. These don't want to slide in their bracket. I might have to take a little bit of a file to them. Okay, so what I did is I took some of the paint off. There was a couple burrs, like some imperfections on the backing pad, the back of the pad, that gotta get them to slide in properly, not too stiff, not too loose, because if they're in here too loose, they're going to cause problems as far as rattling and things like that. So I kind of got it in place. I don't know if I'll buy this set of brake pads again from this company. It's still too tight. Might have to work on them a little more. I don't like how tight they are in there. Could also be the shims are too big. Maybe it's not the pad cut. It could be the shims that they give you. Oh, there she goes. She's going a little better in there. Shouldn't really have to hammer them into place. These pads are just slightly, probably a thousandth out of spec. But I'll work on them. I'll get them in the sliding right. Alright, so now my pads are in place. They're in there pretty good. Now I have to put my caliper back on. Now, on these pins, make sure like how they got a flat side, flat side, flat side. They're facing up in this direction because they're going to wind up making contact to here. If they're like this, they won't fit in. So you have to have them move to the side. Wind up putting this over, push the pin in, get it lined up. Same thing on the bottom. And then we have our bolts we got to thread in. Get that one started. Grab the other one, get it started. Now I'm sure there's a torque spec on these, but I got a calibrated wrist. Now the bracket bolts I would definitely torque. If I got them snug, I'm going to give them like 2 palm strikes. That's tight. Get this one tight. 2 good palm strikes. Camera's in my way to give it a good palm strike. Alright, and our brakes are complete and just have to put the tire back on. Now, a very important thing is, before you test drive it, you got to pump the brake pedal. The first time that you hit the brakes, you're going to have no brakes because this piston's all the way in. We got to pump the brakes to make this piston come out and hit the brake pad. Back in 1987, I was working for a Ford dealer, and a kid never pumped the brakes, and he wound up crashing into 2 brand new T-Birds. That was a hell of a day for that kid. I couldn't believe they didn't even fire him. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pump the brakes and see if we can get video of that piston actually moving. Well, I pumped the pedal. It's nice and hard now. The first time I hit it, it went all the way to the floor, which hopefully we captured a video of the piston moving. So guys, all I have left to do is when I put the car back on the ground is torque the wheels. I'm going to torque up to 100 foot-pounds, but I still have the other side to do. But this is pretty easy work that anybody that has tools can do themselves. Speaking about people that could do things, so one of my lessons earlier in the school year, doing this social distancing, was how to diagnose a lawnmower. And I had one of my students reach out to me yesterday, Brian D. I'm not going to give his last name, but he's in my Auto 2 class, and he sent me this picture yesterday of 3 $20 bills, and I love his quote. Let me get his quote up here. Alright, so his quote says, "The only teacher that lessons put money in the hands." So he works at Home Depot, and he had a customer come in, that lawnmower wasn't working, and he watched my how to fix a carburetor video, and he took a carburetor apart and cleaned it up and put it back on the guy's lawnmower and got it started, and he made himself 60 bucks. So great job, Brian. I wanted to give you a shout out. Alright guys, I'll see you next video.